The world order didn't collapse in 2025. There was no single, dramatic event, no grand announcement. Instead, it shifted quietly, almost silently, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the Earth's surface. What we witnessed was not a sudden break, but a profound and irreversible change in the global balance of power. The unipolar moment, dominated by a single superpower, faded into history. In its place, a new, more complex and unpredictable world began to take shape. This is the story of how that happened, how the familiar lines on the world map began to blur, and new alliances and rivalries emerged to define a new era of global politics. Welcome to 2025, the year the world quietly changed forever. At the heart of this global transformation was the intensifying strategic rivalry between the United States and China. This wasn't just a trade war anymore. It was a full-spectrum competition that reshaped the entire international landscape. In the tech realm, the battle for dominance in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and 5G was relentless. Both nations poured unprecedented resources into research and development. Understanding that technological supremacy would define the 21st century, this created what many called a digital iron curtain, forcing smaller nations to choose sides in a splintering global tech ecosystem. On the economic front, supply chains that once spanned the globe were reconfigured. The push for de-risking and onshoring wasn't just talk, it became national policy, creating new economic blocs and leaving others scrambling. And then there was the military dimension. In the South China Sea and across the Indo-Pacific, naval patrols and military exercises became more frequent and more tense. The arms race wasn't just about traditional weapons. It extended into cyberspace and outer space, creating new, invisible front lines. This epic rivalry became the central drama of our time, a contest of systems, values, and influence, the outcome of which would determine the future of the world order. While all eyes were on the US and China, another major power was making strategic moves of its own. Facing a wall of Western sanctions and diplomatic isolation, Russia pivoted, looking not west, but east and south. This wasn't just a temporary tactic. It was a fundamental reorientation of its foreign policy. The no-limits partnership with China deepened significantly, evolving from rhetoric into concrete action. We saw joint military drills of unprecedented scale, coordinated diplomatic positions at the United Nations, and ambitious infrastructure projects designed to create an economic corridor immune to Western pressure. But it didn't stop there. Russia also actively courted nations across Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, positioning itself as an alternative partner to the West. It offered security assistance, energy deals, and political support, all without the strings of human rights or democracy conditions often attached to Western aid. Beyond this, Russia was not just surviving sanctions. It was actively building a coalition of non-Western states, a network of alliances that aimed to counterbalance the influence of the US and its allies. This strategy accelerated the fragmentation of the global order, creating a world with multiple centers of power and influence. This shift was supercharged by the rise of the BRICS nations. What started as an economic acronym became a powerful political force. In 2025, the blocs expansion was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was a geopolitical reality, with new members from the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America joining its ranks. BRICS became a formidable coalition representing a significant portion of the world's population and economy. This expanded bloc wasn't just about symbolic unity. They began to challenge the very foundations of the post-World War II global order. The new development bank, also known as the BRICS Bank, stepped up its lending, offering an alternative to the IMF and World Bank, often with fewer conditions. More importantly, they accelerated efforts to trade in their own currencies, a direct challenge to the dominance of the US dollar. This move had profound implications, threatening to erode a key pillar of American global power. The BRICS summits were no longer just photo opportunities. They became forums where a new vision for global governance was being forged, one that was explicitly multipolar and less dominated by the West. Caught in the middle of these titanic shifts was Europe. For decades, the European Union had thrived under the security umbrella of the United States, focusing on economic integration and soft power. But in 2025, that reality was cracking. The continent found itself navigating a treacherous path between security and stability. The conflict on its eastern flank served as a brutal wake-up call, forcing a scramble to rearm and rethink its defense strategy. The debate over strategic autonomy moved from academic journals to the halls of power in Brussels, Berlin, and Paris. Should Europe build its own independent military capabilities, or remain reliant on a United States that seemed increasingly distracted by its rivalry with China? This question created deep divisions. At the same time, economic pressures were mounting. High energy costs, competition from both China and the US, and the strain of supporting a war economy tested the Union's unity. Populist movements gained traction, capitalizing on public anxiety and questioning the value of the European project itself. Europe was at a crossroads, struggling to define its role in a world where it was no longer the center, but one of several competing poles. And then a new frontier opened up. Not in space, but at the top of our world. As climate change accelerated the melting of Arctic ice, a region once seen as a desolate wasteland became a new arena for geopolitical competition. Geopolitics in 2025 wasn't just about environmental concerns. It was about shipping lanes, natural resources, and military positioning. The Northern Sea Route, a shortcut between Asia and Europe, became increasingly navigable, promising to slash shipping times and costs. This transformed geography into geopolitics. Russia, with its long Arctic coastline, moved to assert its dominance, reopening Soviet-era military bases and building a fleet of icebreakers. China, declaring itself a near-Arctic state, invested heavily in polar research and sought a foothold in the region. And this is where Greenland became a critical strategic prize. Its location is vital for monitoring both the Arctic and the Atlantic, and its vast, untapped reserves of rare earth minerals essential for green technology and advanced electronics made it a focal point of interest for both Washington and Beijing. The quiet, icy expanse of the Arctic had become a hotbed of strategic maneuvering, a perfect symbol of how environmental change was redrawing the map of global power. And so, by the end of 2025, the world had undeniably entered a new multipolar reality. The era of a single, dominant superpower was over. In its place stood a world with multiple centers of influence. The United States, China, Russia, an expanding BRICS bloc, and a Europe struggling to find its footing. This wasn't a world of clear-cut alliances like the Cold War. It was far more fluid and complex. Nations formed shifting coalitions based on specific interests. A country might be an economic partner in one area and a security rival in another. This new order was less predictable and far more competitive. Power was more diffuse, but so were the risks. With no single global policeman, regional conflicts had the potential to escalate more quickly. The old rules of international relations seemed inadequate for this new landscape, and new ones had yet to be written. The world was more balanced, but also more fragmented and contentious. This was the new normal, a constant, dynamic jostle for power and influence on a global stage with more actors than ever before. This brings us to the central question, the one that hangs over this new era. We've moved beyond the unipolar moment and left the bipolar certainty of the Cold War far behind. We now live in a multipolar world. But is it a safer world? On one hand, some argue that a balance of power is inherently more stable. When multiple great powers check each other's ambitions, it can prevent any single nation from imposing its will on others, fostering a more democratic and pluralistic global system. But there's a darker perspective. A multipolar world is also a world with more potential flashpoints, more rivalries, and a greater risk of miscalculation. With no clear hegemon to enforce rules, the international system could become more chaotic. A great power competition where might makes right and smaller nations are caught in the crossfire. So, as we stand here, in this new and uncertain landscape, we have to ask ourselves, is a world with many poles safer, or is it more dangerous? The answer is not yet clear, and it will be defined by the choices we make in the years to come. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more.